one of the most important things for me that we found in our research, again, according to the census, is that about 80% of all Hispanics in America are Spanish speaking, which is a phenomenal number. And so that doesn't mean they're only Spanish speaking, but that means they do speak Spanish. And the reason that's important, it's because in many of our many Hispanic households in the United States, they are multi-generation and or multi-dimensional, meaning you may have U.S.-born Hispanics who have foreign-born parents living with them, or family who's visiting. So although I myself may be English dominant speaking, it's very likelihood that my mom or my grandmother or an aunt or a cousin also live in my household who are not English language speaking. And so therefore, the amount of time that I invest in TV and radio is going to be divided between English language and Spanish language, meaning I'm going to get a consumption of my information from both. And the reality is, if it's my grandma, I'm pretty much going to watch Spanish language only in the house while she's there. That's just a reality. Grandma's rule, and we live with it. It's a cultural thing. But so it's important that when you're engaging the Hispanic community, that you have to find a way to be able to communicate them in a language that's going to resonate not only with them, but their family, their peers, and so forth. I briefly got my start in campaigns at a young age, but professionally working on different campaigns in Nevada. And in 1998, U.S. Senator Harry Reid from Nevada, the majority leader now, was running for re-election against John Ensign, who's now also a U.S. Senator, was then a congressman. And the senator and his chief of staff, then Reynaldo Martinez, asked if I would help them put together some strategies to mobilize the Latino electorate, and that they needed some help, and they felt that the election was so tight that if they increased just slightly the amount of Hispanics that participated, that they could seal the election for them. And one of the things that I found is I went and I began to want to talk. Nevada is an interesting case study because it has such a huge mix of Hispanics from all across the country and all across Latin America. There's a significant Cuban population, a significant Puerto Rican population, a significant Guatemalan population, Salvadorian population, Mexican population. There's a significant Colombian population now there. It's pretty diverse and pretty reflective of Hispanics across the country and across the globe. And there's a great mixture between foreign-born and U.S.-born Hispanics in Las Vegas. And it was a very emerging group. Las Vegas is still a fairly young city. You don't have the cultural institutional barriers that you would have in a city like Philadelphia or LA or New York, where things have been done a certain way for so long. So it was easy to incorporate new people and new modules into a government and political system because nothing had been that established just yet in Las Vegas. And when I began working with the Hispanic community to try and convince them to work, my natural instinct was to go and talk to all their parents, because parents are voters, right? And to try and get them involved in the campaign. After about 6 weeks, I determined that I was just failing miserably, and that just was not going to work. But what I did, which is the only thing I could think of to try and save face and didn't look like an absolute failure while they were paying me for a campaign, is I used to play soccer in high school, and I went to my old soccer coach, and I began to talk to him about getting some of the players to come out and volunteer with me, and go canvassing and make phone calls for me, and they could use this for extra credit. Many of them needed the extra help so they could qualify to play in the soccer games. So it was a good back and forth. And what I found by targeting these young men, which is my major entrance, was that as a result of bringing young men, they brought some of their friends, but in turn, a lot of young women started tagging around who wanted to hang out with the young men that I was employing to work with me, and I began to reach this huge network of high school students, predominantly juniors and seniors. And then what happened as a result is all of a sudden all these parents that I had been trying to meet with before started calling me back. And they began to tell me, well, we found out, we heard that you hired our son, or that we heard that our daughter is volunteering for you. We wanted to confirm if that's true. And I began to get all these questions from parents. They're like, well, my child has never participated in something like this, and we're happy. We prefer that they're out there doing something like this than out there in a gang or causing trouble or just out on the street milling about. And as a result, these parents now started to take my calls and said, okay, well, what did you want to talk to me about? And I'm like, well, I needed to talk to you about Senator Reid and the Democratic Party and the candidacy. And I found that these young students actually opened the door to me to be able to talk to these parents. And I say this long story just to get to the point that it was as a result of me sitting down and having these conversations with a cross-section of families all across Nevada and across the Las Vegas Valley that I began to really learn all the nuances, that you have multi-generational families living in one house, that you have such a dominance of Spanish language that plays a huge role in their impact, and that there's a difference in how you began to speak with them. And I needed to find a way to work a lot more effectively. And one of the things that to me that I learned very early on was this concept of soccer. And I found that no matter what country were they from or no matter what their heritage was from, that many families would go to see these soccer games, predominantly Latino soccer leagues in Las Vegas, and spend time. And I began to know there's one market that I could go to, there's one event that I'm going to reach a huge cross-section of voters and population that otherwise would not pay attention to politics. And so I began to address the parents at the soccer teams. So what happened is that ultimately in 2007, last year, we decided to take this to the next level. And one of the things that we did is that Nevada, I was asked by Senator Reid to again go to Nevada to work on the Nevada Democratic Caucus. It's the first time Nevada was chosen as an early state, and that Hispanics would have an influence in the presidential election. So we developed a soccer team which got incredible attention worldwide. This is our soccer team there. That's our captain, State Assemblyman Ruben Kewin. And we actually put together a professional team. There's a league team in Las Vegas called Las Ligas Unidas, which is the United Leagues. Has over 10,000 Latino soccer players in this league alone, just in the city of Las Vegas and in the Las Vegas Valley. And we did this for multiple reasons. One of the natural things that I'm sure my friend over here at Dewey Square would ask me is, how do you get engaged and how can you communicate with Hispanics? One of the things that we saw is immediately we wanted to call the team Los Demócratas, which is Spanish for the Democrats. And I will tell you what that did. Every time we went onto the field, every time we had a game, everybody would ask and say, ¿Por qué los demócratas? Why Democrats? And they didn't understand why a sports team would have a political name. Well, in our field, it's so hard to engage someone into a conversation about politics that this way we reversed the script on them. At this point, they were now asking us about politics without even knowing it. They were asking us, why are you Democrats? And it allowed me to go out there and say, this is why I'm a Democrat. Because Democrats are fighting for Hispanic families. Because Democrats are fighting against the Bush administration and the Republicans who are anti-immigrants. Because Democrats are fighting to make sure that our children have an adequate education. It allowed me to do all the messaging that I needed to do, and they were going to sit there and listen. Why? Because they asked me the question, and they wanted to know the answer. And so it was a great opportunity for us to just message the community in English and in Spanish, because we had a bilingual group that would come out there and tell them why we're Democrats. Not only that, but this league was covered by all the major Spanish language media, Univision, Telemundo, the Spanish print weeklies. And we wanted to do branding and also persuasion and mind tactics. Every week, we put together a stellar team for a reason. We wanted them to hear every week when they were reporting the results that Los Demócratas ganaron, the Democrats win. We wanted them to associate the Democratic Party with winning. You know, it's common, you'll see with all these major candidates, I'm sure as soon as Obama's done, they'll have some faction that's called Ganamos con Obama. The same way that you had Ganamos con Kerry and Ganamos con Clinton and Ganamos con Gore. It's a common political strategy that's known in the community that we win with this candidate. We wanted to send the subliminal message that they win with the Democratic Party. So every week, this community was hearing on their trusted station that the Democrats are winning. Los Demócratas ganaron. Los Demócratas ganaron. Every single week they would get that reinforced message. What it also enabled us to do is we were able to get, because we sponsored a team and we helped sponsor the league, we were able to send out our teams of canvassers to an area where we knew there would be people. And let me tell you why that's important. In 2004, I also worked on Latino mobilization in several states across the country, but I was based in Las Vegas. And several organizations try to come do voter registration by typical standards, which is door-to-door canvassing. And I kept trying to tell our national people and donors that I just couldn't do that in Las Vegas, that it wasn't effective. And so I literally had people come with me, and I had a reporter, and we literally went door-to-door to 600 consecutive doors. Now, for any of you guys who know politics, that's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort. Out of those 600 doors, we could not register one person. I mean, it's an incredible, difficult task. And that's that we have to go out there and walk. Whereas we were having hundreds and in some cases thousands of people who were coming to our game, we didn't have to go anywhere, that we could begin to talk to people. So we addressed it on a few different strategies. Here's some of the things we did. One, if the person was already registered to vote, we'd go up to them, hey, are you registered to vote? And they'd be like, yes. Well, great. Let me give you some information about the Democratic Party. Let me give you some information about the caucus and our candidates. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to call me. We're going to be out here every week for the games. Just let me know. No big deal. We'd go up to another person, and they would say, you know what? I'm not a citizen. You know what? That's great. I'm sure you probably know someone who is. So if you know someone, give them this flyer about how to get in touch with them. We're registered to vote. But on top of that, I'm going to give you a flyer for an organization that we work with called the Citizenship Project. And they're going to help you determine whether your status, if you can get legalized and become a citizen. And they'll fill out all your paperwork for free. So you don't have to worry about spending hundreds and sometimes thousands of dollars paying an attorney. So they're going to help you. We want to do that because we care about the Hispanic community. Los Demócratas, that's why we're here. And other people would come and say, you know what, I am a citizen, but I'm not registered to vote. Well, great. Let me tell you about how you can register to vote. So no matter what the situation was, we had an opportunity to break in with them and build a relationship with this community. And for us, that's what it was. And I will be honest with you, it took till about 7 weeks for the majority of the people who came and watched these games, for them to build comfort and trust with us. But you know what? That's standard. How often do you talk to your neighbor? You probably don't talk to your neighbor the first time you see him. You probably see him a few different times before you realize, okay, yeah, I'll go introduce myself. He looks like a decent person, or she looks like a decent person. People need to build those same type of relationships. We knew we had an avenue here where they were going to be seeing us on a weekly basis, so they may not trust us the first time. They may not trust us the second time, but eventually, and I'll, before I get to that, and as anyone here who's ever taken a marketing course or a branding course will tell you, in order for your message to resonate with someone, you got to repeat it how many times?
10.
Yeah, about that. It's common for someone to need to see you about 10 times before they're comfortable. All right, these guys must be legit. They're here every week. Let me go see if I can talk to them, and let's ask about that. Now, on top of that, we were already running our own ads in Spanish and in English, telling people about the caucus, how to get more information, how to participate, talking to them about this soccer team. Now, this soccer team got us an incredible amount of press coverage. It was the first time that any political party in the country had ever put together a soccer team. So we had reporters from Germany, from Brazil, from England, from France who came down and featured us, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. I mean, we had reporters from all over the country who came and chronicled this team. We were featured in Hispanic magazine and other fronts because of the uniqueness of this approach and because it enabled us to eliminate all barriers. Most people expect the people to come to you. But when you're talking about a segment of the population that is already normally adverse to the political system, because they come from many of these immigrants from an area where they don't trust politics and their government system, you're not going to succeed in making them come to you for a large portion of it. But when you go to them, they're going to be more willing to listen. And the number of people we registered to vote, we registered hundreds and hundreds of people to vote at these games. We were able to mobilize and give thousands of flyers for people to become citizens. I mean, the amount of goodwill and investment that we built on this team was just phenomenal. That was great for the party and great for the messaging. And I know that this seems like just a very basic team, but let me tell you what we also did. So here what you'll see is this was our Nevada Democratic Caucus website, which is a website we put up completely in English to teach people everything they need to know about the caucus. The reason we had to do this is because Nevada had never had a caucus before. I should say, was never one of the primary early states before, and so a lot of people did not know how to participate. And so we had to do a huge education effort. But what we did is we did an entire parallel site that's completely run in Spanish. And it's called Nuestro Caucus. And you'll notice that the name Nuestro Caucus it was very different from our English site, which was NV Dems Caucus, Nevada Democratic Caucus, because we wanted, again, messaging. We wanted the Hispanic community to understand this caucus was brought to Nevada to give Hispanics a voice in the process, to give them an opportunity to have a say in the presidential election. And this was the first time in the history of our country that we had ever done something like that. So we wanted them to understand this is your caucus. It's Nuestro Caucus. And I'll get to caucus in a second. One of the things that you'll see is that I had an incredibly difficult task when I went to Nevada. And the reason is because there is no such thing as a caucus in Latin America. A caucus does not exist. There actually is no Spanish word for caucus. Yeah, oops. And so I had to figure out a way to communicate with people. And let me just make sure I explain. There are definitions for caucus in Spanish, but there is no word for caucus in Spanish. And I was talking to a friend who had just come from a baseball game, who he calls baseball. You all know where the name baseball comes from in Spanish? It's a Spanish pronunciation of baseball. There is no, it's not an actual word. There's no grammatic tense in Spanish for baseball. And he was, he's from originally actually from Colombia, and I was asking him about different ways I can go about researching some information about how to explain this process to Hispanics. And he tells me, hazlo Google. I'm like, what the fuck? He's like, yeah, they just pronounce Google in Spanish, right? So he said, hazlo Google, research it. And I started talking to a bunch of friends, and I began to, and they say, internet. I mean, they say all these English words that they just pronounce in Spanish. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take caucus, and I'm going to pronounce it caucus. And I'm going to coin this word. And I'm just going to educate people that from now on, the word caucus is caucus. And I created a new Spanish word. It was great. And it wasn't easy. And it wasn't easy for this reason. And I'm going to repeat the site name because I know that you guys are going to reference it later. Again, it's called nuestrocaucus.com, and it's still up there. And when you go to Preguntas y Respuestas, which is normally for frequently asked questions, at the front page of that link, you're going to see what we did, which is called a glosario de términos, a glossary of terms. One of the problems that we had, and it goes back to the diversity of the Hispanic community, is that people in Venezuela and people in Colombia and people from Mexico, we may all speak Spanish, but our tones and definitions for the words we use change dramatically. And so, just the same way we have different people, on Univision we had a Colombian reporter, we had a Venezuelan reporter, we had a Puerto Rican reporter, we had a Mexican reporter, and when they would talk about elections, they would all talk about it using language that made sense to them. And all they were really doing was confusing the hell out of people, because they were like, well, what is a ballot? Is it a boleta? Is it a boleto? Is it this? Is it that? And everyone was using their own terminology, and we couldn't really educate people about how this process works. So we established this glosario de términos. And what we did, which was pretty phenomenal, is we actually brought representatives from all the media stations, TV, radio, print. Myself, we hired a professional interpreter, translation and Spanish instructor, and we sat down and we said, okay, we all need to come to a consensus about how we're going to talk about this caucus process and this election process. The system's already complicated enough as it is that the last thing we need is for you to murky it up any more than it needs to be and confuse people. So you see here, this is a 4-page document that we put together on pretty much every election-related term that could be used to describe a process. Absentee ballot, allocate, automatic registration, ballot, ballot box, campaign finance, campaign science, candidacy, candidate, candidate stance, campaign profile, canvassing, canvassing board, casting a vote, caucus, census, and you see here, caucus, caucus. That's right. We created that word. Coalition, city clerk's office, again, any term that you can think of that you're going to be able to use whether you're devising a mail ballot piece, just a mail piece, direct mail piece, using it in brochures, but also for the media to be able to educate folks. We came up to a consensus of a uniform set of terminology that we were going to use when we talk to people. And again, it has everything from congressman, council, councilman, district attorney, district clerk, early voting, just all the terms that we would use. And everybody essentially signed an MOU saying that they would agree to stick to this terminology so that we wouldn't confuse people. This is something we did, and actually started getting picked up by all the other states. Other caucus states started calling us and say, hey, we heard you guys are doing something like this. And I'm like, yep, it's online. Download it for free. We've already gone through all the work. We've already paid a translator to come up and to design it and develop it. We just want people to use it so we can stop confusing people. But what I learned was just that there was such a difference in Spanish language between the countries that there was a lot of confusion. So we had to come up with a uniform, consistent way of how to message and get people to agree to use that consistent set of terms. And again, I will tell you that my friend here from Venezuela and Colombia will probably disagree on some of these terms. That's not what we say in Venezuela. But you're going to use it here, I'm telling you. Because we have to be consistent. Otherwise, we do more harm than good in the Spanish-speaking community. But again, this is available for any of you guys who want to go into it. It's a pretty extensive 4-page document, again, just covering any word we can come up with that you may want to use. So this is something we did to move forward on it. The other thing that I will tell you that you need to do, going back to diversity, I popped this up a little bit earlier, is that you need to understand who your audience is. And so one of the things that we are working on, again, I am telling you that we are exactly in the process right now of creating it, is to do an entire abstract by congressional district. These abstracts exist already on the most part on a state level basis, but most people don't campaign on a state level basis. Most people campaign on a district level basis. And it's entirely too much work to break it down by city, so I'm doing congressional district, and you're just going to have to deal with that. But it's important for people to figure out, what it is the community they're talking to. So, for instance, I can go up here, and these are, the main 10 states in the United States that have the highest Hispanic population. So here's the sum of the Hispanic population. And I can go in there and say, give me the total state population so I can compare and see how the Hispanic population rates compared to the overall population. So I can make those comparisons and just begin to actually get a feel for where I'm at. But more importantly for me is once I know what the Hispanic population is, I want to know how it's broken down. So I can go in there and say, how many of these Hispanics are foreign born? How many of them, say, are Mexican or Cuban? And it begins to automatically let me know so that I understand. Now, Cubans are such a small percentage that you really can't see them, but they're right there. But it begins to give me an indication of what they are and so forth. So I know that these are foreign-born Hispanics here. This is how many Hispanics are Mexican, and so forth. I can begin to look how many of them are 18 and over, how many of them are Spanish-speaking. But these are things that we have to begin to do when we're doing any type of communications, because it impacts the communication that you do when you're speaking to the community in those areas. But as I said, so this is a lot of stuff that we're working on. But the most important thing is that you have to focus on is that you have to provide some Spanish language vehicle to communicate with folks, and that I would encourage you that no matter what anyone tells you, I don't care how great Luis says he is, hire an actual trained professional interpreter, translator to actually help you with these things. And these interpreters, and let me quantify that. Let me explain that. I will tell you that what we did was Nuestro Caucus was not interpreted. It was not translated. It is what I call, it was culturized. It was taken and used to explain in a way that is understandable. And sometimes you can't translate things to make it understandable, and sometimes you can't necessarily interpret it. You have to culturalize it to actually meet the market that you're working in. And there are some interpreters who also are Spanish teachers who who are trained in this, who are trained how to actually culturalize your message so that, one, it's universal, that people will understand it, but it's also it's adaptable to the specific community that you're working with. Just taking something and translating it is not going to work. And I'll give you an example, of what a lot of people do, and they just take these web software that exists that translates your page for you. Never do that. It doesn't help you. It's actually going to cost you more damage than help in the long run. And I will tell you that the return on the investment, I know that it's tough because a lot of people just don't anticipate to have to pay this up front, is actually very significant. And it may be pricey to translate something up front, but once you do it, you don't have to translate it again. You can just begin to use language that's already approved and accepted and translated. So I would encourage you to do that. And the other thing is to make it consistent and make sure, again, I will go to that our site in Spanish is the same as our English site. We update it and prioritize it and make sure that it's being updated and worked with as much as possible. Now, there are some things that we do on the Spanish site that we don't do on the mainstream site. Because, again, for instance here, this is focusing on a Spanish language newspaper that did something specifically that took our site and used our terminology and our explanation, and they published an entire 16-page caucus guide. This is an insert inside a Spanish language weekly that they did for free to help educate the voters, but they took our entire language and messaging to help educate Hispanics about the caucus. It's completely done in Spanish, so it's something that we put on our Spanish language website that didn't get put on the English language website. But we made sure that we kept everything consistent. So again, you can look on here in terms of what we do, and it's important for you guys to do that because you don't want to do the impression that you built a Spanish language website and you put just enough content up there so that you can say you have a Spanish language website, but then you don't do anything. That's when you will get attacked for pandering to a community of just doing absolute minimalistics. You have to put in the effort to go in there and actually and provide a sincere opportunity. Now, we had hired people that we had to help us do the translations. I was a primary Spanish language media spokesperson. We had other people that helped us on this process as well. But it's something that you have to be able to do and work with. Otherwise, you're going to create yourself more problems than you're getting yourself help with.